A novel cancer treatment known as a therapeutic vaccine has been approved by the Food and Drug Administration as a novel way to attack cancerous tumors. It's called Provenge, but its story may be more than just a new treatment for prostate cancer. You're listening to ReachMD Radio on XM 160, the channel for medical professionals. I'm Bruce Japsen, your host, and joining me today is Dr. Mark Frohlich. Dr. Frohlich is Senior Vice President of Clinical Affairs and Chief Medical Officer at Dendreon Corporation, a publicly traded Seattle-based biotech company. He previously served as Dendreon's Vice President of Clinical Affairs, and before that was the company's Senior Medical Director. Before joining Dendreon in 2005, Dr. Frohlich was Vice President and Medical Director at biotech firm Excite Therapies. He also has a noted academic background. Before joining the private sector, he was an assistant professor in the Division of Hematology Oncology at the University of California, San Francisco, where he specialized in urologic oncology. Dr. Frohlich did his postdoctoral training in oncology at the University of California, San Francisco. He received his Bachelor of Science from Yale University in Electrical Engineering and Economics and his MD from the Harvard Medical School. We're so happy to have him joining me from Dendreon's offices in Seattle, Washington. Dr. Mark Frohlich, welcome to ReachMD Radio on XM 160, the channel for medical professionals.
Thanks, Bruce. Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here because Dendreon has clearly been in the news off and on over the years, but recently, as biotech companies, this is a rare occurrence when they have victory. They get a drug approved, but you're going to tell us about Provenge and how unique this was, not only the vaccine itself, but the whole process.
Yes, this is an incredibly exciting time, I think, for patients with prostate cancer, for the whole field of immunotherapy, and certainly for us here at Dendreon. So let me spend a little time maybe just describing what Provenge is and how it's administered. So it's classified as an autologous cellular immunotherapy by the Food and Drug Administration. And it's a product that we make by collecting peripheral blood mononuclear cells, the white cells, from patients with a leukapheresis procedure. And those cells are then shipped to one of our manufacturing facilities where they're incubated with a recombinant fusion protein consisting of a prostate tumor antigen or protein, prostatic acid phosphatase, which is fused to immune molecule GM-CSF, which helps to activate the antigen-presenting cells in the product. And those antigen-presenting cells then digest this protein and express the tumor antigen on the surface of those cells. And that's the product that's then infused into the patient to promote the immune system to recognize those prostate proteins. And then presumably T cells become activated and travel throughout the body and are able to attack the cancer cells wherever they may be. And Provenge has been in clinical development for prostate cancer for over 10 years now. And what we've shown in the most recent IMPACT trial, which is a trial of 512 patients with asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer, was that overall survival was prolonged in the men who got Provenge relative to placebo by a median of 4.1 months. And the percentage of men who were alive at 3 years was 32% compared to 23%.
Well, and when physicians who are out there, either if they have a cancer specialty or if they're primary care, a lot of them might be more familiar with Lupron, Zoladex. Where does this treatment fit in the course of prostate cancer therapy for men?
So to review the kind of the natural history of the disease, so often if prostate cancer is caught early, it can be treated definitively with things like radiation therapy or surgery. Many of those men can be actually cured. But between 20 and 40% of the men will actually subsequently have relapse of their disease, which is typically manifested by a rise in the tumor marker PSA. And those men often at some point go on to hormonal therapy, either continually or intermittently. And that's very effective therapy for a period of time, but the disease often then subsequently progresses, ultimately spreading to lymph nodes and bone. And when the hormones stop being effective, it's a so-called castrate-resistant prostate cancer. Where we studied patients was in this group of patients who had metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer, and specifically in men who had no symptoms or minimal symptoms. And so this is where Provenge is currently approved to be used. The other treatments in this space include the only other therapy shown to prolong survival for men with advanced prostate cancer is the chemotherapy agent docetaxel, which is approved for men with metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer.
For a lot of our listeners, they might not realize that the FDA's action was written up as a watershed event in several publications because you guys had to overcome a controversial rejection of the application 3 years ago. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think in the history of the FDA, we know they're scrutinizing things more closely, but this is a little different story than, approving a pill such as a Vioxx that later has problems. I mean, this was several challenges in it because it was a new treatment.
So Dendreon initially did 2 randomized phase 3 trials in men with asymptomatic metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer. And one of those trials did not meet its primary endpoint of time to disease progression, but when the overall survival analysis was done after 3 years of follow-up in all men, there was strong evidence of an effect on overall survival with a 4.5-month median survival benefit, which was statistically significant with a p-value of 0.01. And then there was a second trial in which enrollment was discontinued early prior to the availability of the survival results from the first trial, which showed a trend in the same direction. It was these data that we took to the FDA, and the FDA convened an advisory panel in 2007 and asked the panel to assess the safety and the efficacy of the product. And they voted unanimously that there was substantial evidence of safety, and 13-4 in favor that there was substantial evidence of efficacy of the product. And typically, the FDA follows the recommendations of an advisory panel, but in this case, they issued Dendreon a complete response letter requesting additional clinical data to support the efficacy claim. And fortunately for Dendreon, the IMPACT trial that I described initially was already underway and enrolling patients. And so we were able to provide those additional results when the trial was unblinded. And that was then the complete package that we provided to the FDA was those 2 initial trials and then the IMPACT trial.
They just wanting additional data to show what? I mean, if it's safety, the advisory panel says safe, it's showing efficacy.
The concerns the FDA had were that those 2 initial trials were not large. The first one was 127 patients. The second one was 98 patients. So oncology products typically approved these days. The trials are larger than that. And the second point was that the primary endpoints of the trial as they were designed was to measure an effect on time to disease progression. And we were not able to show that. And anytime a trial does not meet its primary endpoint, there's a concern that subsequent findings might not be true findings. And so they wanted to see additional evidence to ensure themselves that the treatment effect was real. And the IMPACT trial, in fact, did confirm that.
Well, if you're just joining us, or even if you're new to our channel, you're listening to ReachMD Radio on XM 160, the channel for medical professionals. I'm Bruce Japsen, your host. And joining me today is Dr. Mark Frohlich. He's a Senior Vice President of Clinical Affairs and the Chief Medical Officer at Dendreon Corporation out in Seattle. And they were just recently approved for a therapeutic cancer vaccine for prostate patients, and we were just talking about sort of their road to approval. And Dr. Frohlich, if you could, tell us a little bit about this process and what it means for other potential treatments, because I think if you guys were the guinea pigs, if you will, the FDA saying, well, even though our advisory panel gives us an overwhelming approval, it's got 100 or 200 patients in the trial, you go out and you do more study on 500 patients. What does that mean to the field going forward for new treatments?
There's a tremendous amount of excitement, enthusiasm in the cancer immunotherapy community at this time because people have been really working on this types of approaches trying to harness a patient's immune system for decades. Unfortunately, many setbacks, some glimmers of hope, but multiple setbacks. And so this is the first time that an improvement in overall survival has been demonstrated in a large randomized trial. So I think this really encourages people that this great promise and dream, which people have had for so long, is in fact has become a reality, and that additional means of harnessing the immune system are certainly possible. So I think we're going to be seeing many more new approaches to try to harness a patient's own immune system. And we here at Dendreon are, now that this treatment approach has been validated, our platform has been validated, are very interested in moving and targeting different types of cancers. And in fact, we have a program targeting the tumor antigen HER2/neu overexpressed in breast, bladder, ovarian, colorectal cancer. We'll be moving into additional clinical trials with that approach. We're also targeting the tumor antigen carbonic anhydrase 9 overexpressed in the vast majority of kidney cancers, and we'll have a clinical program which we'll be launching in that area as well.
And for our listeners who might not understand, I mean, when you're talking about a biotech company, they don't have endless access to cash. And so a smaller company might have given up. And so I think with this, you were well funded even in this kind of crazy economic time that we have, and you were able to forge ahead, which isn't always the case. And so I think part of the lesson here would probably be that you've paved the way in telling other academics and clearly private sector companies that this is what the FDA wants.
That's correct. And I think some of the lessons that we learned along the way were in terms of, trial design, what the most appropriate endpoints are. We learned, for example, that time to disease progression is not a good endpoint with an immunotherapy such as Provenge. And certainly in prostate cancer, it's not a particularly good endpoint. And overall survival is really an endpoint that best captures the clinical efficacy of the product and really is the gold standard for oncology treatments. And so I think lessons like that about, how to design trials and what endpoints to choose and what patient populations to choose, I think will be helpful for others to come in the future.
Well, you bring up an interesting point as far as time to disease progression and survival. And there have been some critics, if you will, who say, well, there's 4.5 months survival, but won't you be continuing the study? I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's it. I mean, it could be, that's what you were able to get the drug approved, but there will be more study. I mean, with the therapeutic, some people think vaccine, they think, well, that means I'm not going to get it. But where do you see this headed to potentially there could be measures for even longer survival?
Approximately 4 months a median survival benefit is a median. Exactly, it's the typical patient experiences, but there are some patients who may be benefiting substantially more than that, and I think that really comes down to individual patients' immune response and how they respond to it, and that's something that we'll continue to investigate. And the other thing is I think that it encourages us to look earlier in the natural history of the disease with an immunotherapeutic approach like this. Those patients certainly may benefit, and with an even more intact immune system may have even greater benefit. And those are areas that we're interested in exploring in clinical trials. I.e.,
you would have them get the vaccine maybe after they were diagnosed as an example, and then see where it played itself out.
Right, and so we've started to explore those things in the neoadjuvant setting. So we have a clinical trial ongoing now where men get Provenge prior to having their prostate removed and looking in the prostate to see evidence of immune activation in the prostate. We've also completed a trial or completed enrollment in a trial where we were looking at administering Provenge in men who had a rising PSA after their prostate was removed. So those are the types of clinical trial settings that we're interested in conducting additional clinical trials to determine the potential clinical benefit of Provenge in that setting.
And it helps to have something approved and generating sales to fund all this, I'm sure.
Clinical trials take a lot of resources, so indeed to ask questions and to design the trials in a way that can provide the level of evidence that physicians and the FDA requires a substantial number of patients and a number of years to conduct those trials. So having the resources to do that is indeed important.
Well, with that, we would like to thank Dr. Mark Frohlich, who has been our guest. He is the Chief Medical Officer and Senior Vice President of Clinical Affairs at Dendreon Corporation. If you've not heard about Dendreon is a Seattle-based biotech company that cleared a long-awaited hurdle in getting its therapeutic cancer vaccine for prostate patients known as Provenge approved. It's something that you'll want to watch and pay attention to going forward because it's a company that is going to be looking at this. They're not done yet, even though they've cleared a huge milestone. I'm Bruce Japsen. I've been your host, and you've been listening to ReachMD Radio on XM 160, the channel for medical professionals. ReachMD, online, on demand, and on the air. Please check us out at reachmd.com, and I'd like to thank you today for listening.